Hi, everybody. It's great to be back here again. It's Friday, Parashat Haazinu, and just want to focus on a couple of verses here in the portion. We know this song, Haazinu, is a song where Moshe Rabbeinu relates to the people of Israel before his death, the last day of his life. And in verse 7 in chapter 32, Moshe Rabbeinu opens up with saying, remember, remember the days of history. Pay attention to Dor V'Dor for the generations. Sha'alavicha, ask your father and they will tell you, and ask your elders and they will tell you. What is this referring to? It's a simple, how do I describe Rav Kook? I can use Rav Kook. Rav Kook had a way of, instead of writing the word history with a tet, which is the common way of writing it in modern Hebrew, he would write it with the letter tav. And what was the difference? Because the word history is divided into two words in Hebrew. Hester ya, God hiding himself. Behind the historical events of history, we have to see and pay attention how God is pushing the events forward. And that's really the deep understanding of history. We have to ask our Father, who our fathers here, our prophets and our elders or our sages, for advice. They're the ones who are those who passed down for generations the beautiful, deep insights of the world, being holy people, connected to Hashem, connected to the Torah, prophecy. And we have to pay attention and listen very, very keenly to our elders. You know, today the world suffers greatly from a syndrome of we know it all, we don't need our teachers, right? I even had a song out there, we don't need no education or something like that. But in reality today, the world of the internet, a student could come along and say, look at this, I'm going to look up everything and Dr. Google and come to class all prepared and outdo the teacher. But in reality, that's the biggest mistake, thinking that a teacher is there to present knowledge. That's part of it, of course, to teach and to help and explain. But more than anything, a teacher has a life experience behind him. Someone who's, of course, older than his students usually, or someone who's experienced a lot, has a lot of experience in life. And talking, of course, homeroom teachers, the ones that should be there, we call in Hebrew mechanech, the homeroom teachers that really connect to the students and try to make impacting changes within their hearts. And that will happen with someone who really has a life experience. And that cannot be replaced by any machine or Google. One day they'll come up with a great invention, a little Google chip in your brain, and everyone could do it on the spot, think about it, and they'll know all the answers, but that doesn't mean anything. It's good to know, but in reality, what makes a person a true person is if he can let the knowledge that he has have a true impact on his heart, on his character, and make him a better person to walk justly, to walk right in this world, which is doing love and kindness, and being a good person. You could be a person, could be a very, very knowledgeable person, but he could be evil and do terrible things. But through Torah, the Torah teaches us this great important fact. Always, you must always ask your father and always ask your grandfather. Don't think you know all the answers, right? Ask your elders, your rabbis, your teachers. Don't be, as we say, arrogant in your knowledge, but turn to your elders. They have been there. They know they can supply you with a lot of important information that will change your life. Not information as far as 1 + 1 is 2 or all kinds of facts, but more than anything, try to absorb their life experience. Try to absorb the work they've done in this world. As a person grows older, he's supposed to be working on himself. So when a person has all that great experience of life, they could share that with their student and make a true impact on their behavior. And that's really what it is to pay attention to our forefathers, to pay attention to our great teachers and elders, and not, forget about our history, where we have come from. Always remember where we have come from. And that's the first verse here. I want you to relate to. The next verse talks about Banchil Elyon Goyim, when God gave portions to the nations. When he separated man. Yatsev Gvulot Amim, he would establish the nations according to the borders of nations. The Mispal B'nai Israel, according to the number of Israel. Now here, this verse is very, very difficult, and it ends with Verse number 9, Ki chelek Hashem amo, because God's portion is his nation. Yaakov, Jacob, chevel nachalato, the portion of inheritance. What does that really mean? And how does it relate to the previous verse about the history? Paying attention to history. And I want to bring down today Rashi's understanding over here. And Rashi says like this, Rashi says, Banchel elyon goyim, when God gives out inheritance to nations. Kishinchil HaKadosh Baruch Hu lachisav, l'machisav et chelek nachalatan, hitzifanu shtafam. Rashi says, talking about over here, when God gave out to the nations their inheritance, different land portions, he ended up flooding them out with the flood, bringing a flood upon the world, because when they sinned before God, they weren't deserving of their inheritance. And then, of course, the song that Moshe Rabbeinu is relating covers a large, the entire historical period, a long time of history, till the end of days, till the end. And he goes on to say, "Bafrido b'nei Adam." So he's jumping now from the flood to the next stage, after the flood, when God separated on the Tower of Babylon, he separated the nations, when he confused the languages. Yatsev gvulot amim. He established the different borders of the nations. And Rashi says, like this, Rashi says, Bafrido b'nei Adam keshifitz dor hapalaga haya biyado lavira min olam. When God scattered the generation of the Tower of Babylon, when he confused the language, God could have eliminated them totally. But he did not eliminate the nations. But he established their borders, and he allowed them to live and did not destroy them. So Rashi is explaining that verse, and then he goes on to say here, according to the number of Israel. And what does that mean? Rashi says, B'shvil mispal b'nei Yisrael. Rashi is saying something very profound. He's saying, because of the number of Israel, shatidim letzeit mibnei Shem, ולמספר 70 נפש של בני ישראל שירדו למצרים, הציב גבולות עמים 70 לשון. Rashi says, these 70 nations, because the children of Shem, that's where Israel comes from. And therefore, when God set up the nations and he allowed them to live, Rashi is saying he did it, as he's explaining the verse, according to the number of Israel. What does it mean, the number of Israel? As we know, it was 70 souls that went down to Egypt. 70 nations, right? And that is why the nations that were allowed to remain, because Israel was to come out of those nations and come to the land of Israel, of course. Why? Ki chelek Hashem amo. Because God's portion is his own people. What does he mean by that? Lama kol zot, Rashi says, why this? V'shayach chilko kavush b'nehem v'atid letzeit. Because God's portion sort of was almost in captivity amongst the nations, but in the future would come out of the nations. Umiu chelko, what is God's portion? Amo, his nation. When the nation was scattered in captivity. Umihu amo, and who's his nation? Yaakov chevel nachalato, Jacob, the portion of his inheritance. So God's portion is his own people. Rashi goes on to say, what does that mean? Because Jacob is the third of the forefathers. Hamishulash b'shalosh zchuyot. He has 3 merits because he's the third of the forefathers. Zchut avi aviv, he has the merit of his grandfather Abraham. Zchut aviv, the merit of Isaac. V'zchut, what is the third zchut? V'zchut, zchuto, his own merit. That's 3. We know that Rashi says kechevel zeshu asui begimel gdilim, because the word in Hebrew for a string, for a rope, a strong rope, which is made out of 3 different strands, is very strong, is called chevel in Hebrew, which could also mean a portion, right? So here it's like a play on words, and therefore Rashi says Ari gimel kechevel zeshu asui begimel gdilim, vu vanav hayulo lenachala, and therefore, who? Jacob and his children were God's inheritance. V'lo Yishmael ben Avraham, and not Yishmael the son of Abraham, velo Esav, and not Esau, Esav, beno shel Yitzchak, the son of Isaac. So what is Rashi basically saying over here? Is that God's portion is the people of Israel, Jacob, his family, not Ishmael, and not Esav, and not the kingdom of Edom. And of course, this very powerful teaching of history, what Rashi is teaching us is that what these verses mean is that we look into history, we have to see and pay attention how God's portion is the people of Israel. And the nations will not come, although nations have tried to take over God's portion, God's land. Ishmael, we've had a lot of challenges to this very day. We have a lot of challenges with Ishmael, with the Arab world, and of course with the Edomite world in the past. And of course the pressure, they're still pressuring us from around the world to try to prevent us from properly inheriting our land. But the Torah is saying right over here, Moshe Rabbeinu is saying that Israel's portion, God's portion is Israel, and that the nation of Israel will always be in the land of Israel, which is waiting, being protected basically until we've come home. And God, not only that, actually the nations of the world, He allowed them to live for the sake of shame, so God's nation will come out and be able to set up God's portion in the land of Israel, where Israel will rectify those nations. Those nations were, God didn't give up on those nations, even the nations have fallen so far away. But God is saying, my people will come, my portion, will be living in the land of Israel, and they will be a light to all those nations. And the world will know that there's one God of the world. And as we say, at the end of days, all the nations will come along and they will speak one clear language and no more division. But they will know there's one true God of the world, that they have to work and serve Hashem, and they will connect again to the innermost chambers of spirituality, of realizing Ein od milvado, there's no one besides God in the world. This will bring perfection, tranquility, and beauty to the universe, which we so much are waiting for. Shabbat shalom, b'sorot tovot, yeshuot v'nechama.